The country of Yemen is in the midst of an escalating humanitarian crisis. The United Nations estimates that a child under 5 dies in Yemen every 10 minutes from preventable causes. Almost 400,000 children are at risk of death from severe malnutrition, and aid agencies say that the situation is going to much worse unless the Saudi-led coalition lifts the current blockade on Yemen. That is just a small part of what journalist Iona Craig witnessed while she was there. And I want to warn you, the pictures you're about to see, extremely disturbing.
It's the impact on the wider civilian population that you often don't really get to see. Abdulaziz is a 9-year-old boy in Hodeidah hospital, and as you can see from the footage, he's suffering from severe acute malnutrition. Well, obviously it was very shocking to see a young boy in a state like that. He is skeletally thin, and he was lifeless, just lying there whilst the doctors were trying to administer glucose to him.
Sadly, the young boy you saw there, he passed away several days after those scenes were recorded. And joining me now is CNN senior international correspondent Nema Al-Bagher. Nema, you were in Yemen at the start of the blockade. It's a country you've covered many times. In fact, you and your crew were the first journalists into Aden during that time. Tell us how the U.S. factors into this crisis. It's largely seen from the outside as kind of a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but of course Saudi Arabia, a U.S. ally. How big is the U.S. participation in this war?
Well, there are real key concerns and questions about the extent of the US's involvement, the US's complicity, not just ethically, but legally. Back in May, President Trump signed a $110 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia, and at the time it was seen by his advisors. Jared Kushner was actually seen high-fiving H.R. McMaster as this massive coup, but the reality is it has deeply implicated the U.S. in a conflict where there are genuine concerns about the human rights violations being carried out by the Saudi-led coalition. They are currently blockading much-needed aid going into the country, and that's why the UN is ringing these alarm bells, and they're concerned about the potential death of 50,000 children unless that blockade is lifted. And the worry is, Jim, that in return for that arms deal, that perhaps the US has bartered a lot of that key leverage that it needs to, at the moment, be applying pressure with.
And to be clear here, what is the value of the blockade in military terms? I mean, what is Saudi Arabia's justification for a blockade which, of course, is harming many civilians as well?
Well, the Saudi-led coalition says that this is because the Houthi militants are backed by Iran, and their concern is about the rearmament and the ability for Iran to get supplies into these rebels. But of course, in all conflicts, whether it was the conflict in Syria where the anti-ISIS coalition had to create corridors for civilians fleeing ISIS, knowing full well that perhaps ISIS fighters would be hiding amongst them, that is always the balance that you have to try and strike. But the fundamental international laws governing the rules of engagement say that you have to allow civilian supplies in, no matter what the cost is to you militarily.
Nema Al-Bagher, thanks very much. We know you've been on the ground there many times.